Museums Victoria respectfully acknowledges the traditional owners of the lands where we work, the Wurundjeri and Boonwurrung peoples of the Eastern Kulin Nation, and First Peoples language groups and communities across Victoria and Australia. We pay our respects to their elders past, present, and their emerging leaders. Our organisation, in partnership with the First Peoples of Victoria, is working to place First Peoples living cultures and histories at the core of our practice.
Welcome everyone, welcome to ScienceWorks. My name is Jonathan Shearer, I'm the General Manager here at ScienceWorks, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to this special event tonight. I'd also like to welcome all of those who are joining us online tonight who are not in the room with us, and hopefully you get an amazing experience as we are having here in the museum today. I would also like to acknowledge that we are gathered here tonight on the lands of the Boonwurrung people of the Eastern Kulin Nation. I'd like to pay my respects to them as the traditional custodians, as the first scientists, the first engineers, the first astronomers who lived on this land, and the first people who understood and explored this sky. I'd like to pay my respects to their ancestors, elders, and any other First People who are joining us here tonight. And I'd also like to thank Cindy and Leah, who are providing interpretation for Auslan viewers tonight. Thank you very much for joining us. So tonight's event is part of a series we have at Museums Victoria called Future Forums, Ideas Shaping Tomorrow. It's a series of conversations that brings together the world's brightest innovators and creative thinkers to reflect on the big ideas and important questions that shape our future. But tonight is extra special because it's also part of Melbourne Design Week. It's part of ScienceWorks Design Week Hub, Design Beyond Earth, which explores the role of contemporary design in space industries, celebrating the diverse ways that science can create a better future both on and off Earth. And this presentation as part of Design Week couldn't have been possible without the incredible support of Creative Victoria, Melbourne Design Week, the NGV, and the Australian Space Agency. And so for our first discussion tonight, we have From Robots to Rovers, Design for Proxy Space Exploration, and it's been developed in partnership with the Australian Space Agency. We'll explore some of the groundbreaking space programs that the agency is spearheading as part of our first mission to the moon. So it should be super exciting for us all. So thank you for joining us, and it's my great pleasure now to invite our host for tonight, award-winning journalist Sara James, who will introduce our speaker.
Thank you so much, Jonathan, and it's a real pleasure to be here again at ScienceWorks and talking about space, which is a favorite conversational topic. And it is my pleasure now to bring to the stage Dr. Alessandra Monerris Belda, who is the Space Technology Director for Strategy and Integration at the Australian Space Agency. I think that just briefly went out. So if you please join me in welcoming Sandra to the stage. Yes, go right ahead. Yes, and Dr. Monerris Belda has said that we can call her Sandra, which is that wonderful kind of combination of technological and academic prowess and Australian humility. So thank you very much for letting us call you Sandra, but giving you credit for your many accomplishments with the Australian Space Agency. I'll tell you a little bit more about Sandra in a moment. But first, I thought to get us started, do you think we should look at the G'day Moon?
Let's do it.
Okay, let's have a look at this clip to get us in the mood.
We've long been a land of explorers and adventurers, travellers and trailblazers. We've traversed all manner of terrains, chased the horizon in every direction, climbed higher, descended deeper, gone further. And still, the quest continues. There will always be more to explore. So, where to from here? We say, bring on the beyond. Our boldest adventure yet. Australia, we're going to the moon.
Sandra, when you watch that, do you get a little bit excited?
A lot. I really liked watching that video. I think it's very inspirational.
I like the thought of having thongs on the moon?
That was intense.
Yeah, again, such a terrific little example. Let me tell our audience here, and I would like to welcome everyone in our audience. Certainly all of you who are here with us in person, please give yourselves a round of applause. Thanks for joining us. And I'd also like you to give another round of applause for everybody who's joining us online. Big round of applause for those online. Thank you very much. Oh, I appreciate it. And now let me tell you a little bit more about Sandra. Dr. Alessandra Monerris Belda is, as I said, the Space Technology Director at the Australian Space Agency. She represents Australia at the International Space Exploration Coordination Group. Alessandra leads a team responsible for the development of technical roadmaps, scoping opportunities for Australia to join international projects, and supporting space sciences, space research, and this is very important, space sustainability initiatives. So quite a combination of things that you do. I guess one thing that I want to start with, Sandra, is the fact of the matter is this is a long to-do list, and the Space Agency has only been around for 5 years. Is that, I mean, that kind of sounds like a short time, but really space exploration goes a lot further back, doesn't it?
For Australia, it does. The agency is going to be turning 5-year-old on the 1st of July, so it's still like in primary school, if you want to say it, but that's not the start of space exploration for Australia. As Jonathan was saying in his introduction, the first astronomers were the First Nations Australians. Possibly the modern times for space exploration in Australia starts in the 1950s, in the Woomera Range in South Australia, with when some space tracking activities and also some launch activities started. People may not know that Australia was one of the first countries in the world in the 60s to launch its own satellites from its own soil, the RESAT-1, also from the Woomera Range. And I don't know if we have someone in the room or online that is from the University of Melbourne, but in the 70s, Australia was the second country, just after the US, that launched an amateur satellite. Students from University of Melbourne developed and launched Oscar 5. So that's been a long time in the making. I guess that what is most known for Australia possibly is its contribution to the Apollo missions. In the 1970s, Australia was the country outside of the US that had the most tracking stations in support of the Apollo missions. There was the Honeysuckle station in ACT that supported lots of that, and also the Parkes Observatory as well here in Australia. So if someone has seen the first moments of the video of the arrival to the moon, the video streaming was downlinked here in Australia. So it was another in Honeysuckle, and then it moved into Parkes. So Australia's contribution has been great and a long time going.
Well, first of all, I think that you have just told us that, and I think you're quite right to point this out, that Australia's connection to understanding the heavens goes back 60,000 years. So I think it's incredibly important to acknowledge that. And although Jonathan has acknowledged the Wurrung and the Boonwurrung people of the Eastern Kulin Nation, I would like again to acknowledge that remarkable custodianship of our waterways and the heavens above us. Have you, as somebody who is professionally involved in the space industry, have you had the opportunity to look into what the First Nations people here in Australia have done? Have you had an opportunity to talk to Indigenous Australians about that?
Not me personally, but someone in my team is doing that. We are looking into dark, quiet skies, this sustainability work, and we are in collaboration with the National Association of Australians. So they are always involved in all the conversation and all the work we do.
Which is incredibly impressive. Going back, though, to some of the other things that you talked about, and I guess what Westerners think of as space exploration, which is you go back to Honeysuckle Creek and the like. You know, I want to have a show of hands here. How many people in the audience have seen the old movie The Dish? Yes, okay, so quite a few. So anybody who's seen The Dish, and I certainly have seen it a couple of times, we're familiar. Have you had a chance to see that movie yet?
I didn't see it until I came to Australia. And everyone was like, have you seen The Dish? And I was like, I have not.
I know, I was the same. I got to Australia. I think we're both dual citizens. I'm American and Australian, you're Spanish and Australian. So we've both seen The Dish. Now, you're somebody who's in the Australian Space Agency. How accurate is it? Is that what it was like?
I will reserve my,
All right, you're going to reserve judgment on that.
my judgment on that.
Okay. Well, it's a very good movie. Let's give it lots of points for a good movie. But going back to that, because again, we're going to go to the Rovers, but I think it's important to first talk about the unique attributes that Australia has when it comes to space exploration. We have, I guess, an opportunity in terms of where we are in the world, don't we?
Yes, yeah. Due to the geographic location in the southern hemisphere, also the land size of Australia, it's a great location for mostly that's what has a long track of tracking space missions and space communications. Because if you look around, there is not many land masses in this area of the world in the southern hemisphere that could contribute to space missions.
Yes, and we're on one. We're on a very important one. So when you started the Australian Space Agency, how significant of a step forward have these last 5 years been? There's been a very concerted presence in working in the space arena, but that last 5 years of actually having a national space agency, how significant has that been, Sandra?
I think it has not only because it was here in the milestone, I think it's been a very important milestone for Australia because now there is like this single point of contact, like the access door to Australia and all civil space matters is through the agency. We have coordination on all the efforts across Australia that maybe before there was no going kind of like in a we are sort of giving like the vision and the direction as a team Australia all together. And by being like the entry door and leading all the international engagement, it's easier for us to see what are the capabilities and kind of like scope opportunities for Australia more easily. I think it's been very important for Australia moving forward.
One of the aspects about this conversation that appealed to me is the link to Design Week, the idea of design being an element of space exploration and all that comes next with Artemis and the like. And we'll talk about that in a moment. But, I mean, it occurs to me that the sustainability aspect, what happens in space, we think about Earth pushing us forward into space, but there's a boomerang effect, isn't there? It's what space means for us here on Earth. Can you talk about that?
Space exploration, I think it's been always in human mind, just because we are curious. As the video says, we are explorers. What's out there? I don't know if we are able to, I have included one slide so that you can see the fleet, that current fleet of planetary, this one here. We have been talking about proxies for space exploration. We are not able to send humans everywhere. We are not able to send humans to explore the solar system, so we have been doing that with Proxy, with robots, with probes, with lots of satellites, as you can see here, for planetary exploration. The why we do that and why that is important, it's mostly first because it pushes us, it creates new knowledge, creates new technologies, new science, new discoveries. It also has a very important inspiration piece. I don't know if you are aware, I saw a chart which was very interesting of how the uptake of high-skilled jobs and STEM careers and people wanting to pursue a career in STEM significantly increased during the Apollo era and significantly decreased when the Apollo program was finished.
Well, we had about 50 years where it was kind of quiet.
It was kind of quiet. So it's also, and then there's the inspirational piece as well, you know, like having this bold, bright flagship project. So all these in terms, as you can see here, in terms of planetary explorations, I haven't included here, but something very important of space exploration is looking to the Earth, what it's called Earth observation. Australia has been a very early adapter and user of Earth observation satellites as a way to manage this big country. And it brings lots of benefits to us, as in it helps lots of industries, it helps farming.
Can we talk about farming for a minute? Because I think that's fascinating. I was with somebody interviewing them the other day, and they were showing me their tractor. Video of their tractor with the lines that they were following in the field that were perfect, that were coming down from the GPS. It was all GPS technology, but they were actually able to remotely drive their tractor through their field in Western Victoria as a result of space exploration. Do you think that people, this is a very informed audience, both online and here in the room, but do you think that everybody in Australia fully appreciates all of the ways in which we use space all the time for the things we do on Earth?
I think that maybe you do not appreciate the extent to which daily life at the moment depends on space-enabled services. As you said, most of the farming currently is done using satellite signals for positioning and navigation and timing. Banking, all the system of the banking, all the resource industry and remote operations also depend on that. Water management, land management.
Climate change, what we're
climate
paying
change
attention.
monitoring and mitigation,
So it's all connected.
It's all connected.
There's another aspect in which the unique geography of Australia factors into what we're doing in space. I want to get to mining and I want to get to the rovers because I'm sure everybody's here is interested to talk about the rovers. Can you tell us a little bit about the rover potential for Australia? Why did Australia in particular, why did we get picked to do the rover?
The why a rover as opposed to other things in this project was because NASA and internationally as well, it's acknowledged the great expertise of Australia coming mostly for their resources and mining industries in Australia of remote asset management, robotics and automation. So it could be seen as a leverage. You could use your expertise on remote operations. For instance, I don't know if you know, but most of the resource and mining assets in the Pilbara regions, they are being operated from Perth. So translating all that remote asset management into remote operations on the moon was seen as a strength for Australia, and that's what specifically the rover was picked as a contribution.
But we should point out, because I think it's easy to forget this, that getting a rover that works in space is not easy. Not many countries have done it successfully, have they?
Not really. There's been about just over on the moon, I think around 7 that have been going there. Yep. And now there's many more. But I think Australia has great potential in robotics and automation.
So with our expertise in mining and our understanding of how to handle hostile conditions like that, we're going to create the rover. Tell me a little bit about that process. What goes into that? It can't be simple.
Into our Trailblazer project?
Yes, into the Trailblazer project.
Yeah. So, Alice, if we are able to show everyone as I speak.
Sorry, everyone, it's a bit tricky because the slides are behind me. So do you mind if I cheat and look over my shoulder?
That's okay.
This is a fantastic slide and I don't want to miss it.
There should be the clip for the Trailblazer, if possible. If not, I can speak.
I'm so sorry, I'm going to interrupt for another reason. We're using a wonderful website to make sure that our online audience and our in-person audience can submit questions, but there's a typo on the code. So for anyone in the room, it's Rovers with an S 2005. I'm sorry to interrupt.
I'm so glad you did.
I wanted the questions to keep flowing. So if you go to that website, we won't be offended if you're on your phone during the talk. You can either just submit a question or upvote other people's questions through that.
All right,
Sorry.
and again, that's hashtag Rovers with an S 2005, Rovers 2005. All right, so hashtag Rovers 2005. And Jonathan, I think that's great. This is a friendly audience. We want to be able to chat about stuff and make sure we get the questions coming. So tell us a little bit about the slide behind me.
Yep. So Australian rover is called Trailblazer. So it all started in 2020. Australia signed the Artemis Accords, NASA's Artemis Accords. For those that are not familiar with them, it's now the new program of NASA and international partners to return to the moon. And it's going to be, the intention is for the first woman and the first person of color to land on the moon. And then settle on the moon, create a permanent settlement on the moon on the way to, in the future, to send humans into Mars. So the concept has changed from the Apollo times, in which it was the astronauts were there for a few days. Now the intention is to create a permanent presence on the moon as a way to go to Mars.
And we should point out as well that, and again, this is an informed audience, but the Artemis project, it's really several different stages, isn't it? 1, 2, and 3. Can you talk a little bit about what's going to happen in 2024 and then what's going to happen in 2025?
So before we go to that, I don't know if someone has seen the launch of Artemis 1. That was in November last year. So this was an uncrewed mission. It was only just to test the new rocket. It's the first rocket that is able to send both the cargo and the astronauts in the very same launch and up to the moon orbit. 2024, there will be the first crewed mission. It's not going to land.
It's going to be a flyby, right?
It's going to be a flyby. You may have seen that already the astronauts have been selected. There is 3 US astronauts, NASA astronauts, and there's going to be 1 Canadian joining them. And that's going to be only a flyby. That's going to be the farthest that humans have gone from the Earth. And Artemis 3 will be the first one that's going to be a mission in which there's going to be astronauts landing on the moon.
And when we get to Artemis 3, there's another element of this that I find fascinating, which is going to be the combination between a NASA rocket or a NASA spaceship and also one from SpaceX.
Yeah, that's the way.
That's Artemis 3.
Artemis is going to go now. So it's this an understanding that space exploration is not something that a country can do alone. And in this case, the return to the moon is going to be done not only by space agencies, but also by commercial players.
So let me come back to the notion of design and to the notion of what you were showing behind me before. Again, this is a conversation about design. So designing this complex mission of getting to the moon and not just 1, 2, 3 steps back on and home you go, but actually staying there. Can you talk about how much more complex it is to design something like this, Sandra?
Well, it's a completely different situation to the one before. Now you need to think not only on an astronaut being there for a few hours and then going back. Now you need to look into habitation, how they're going to live, how to produce power, how to find resources so that they can find water, oxygen, and how to communicate, because there's going to be more people living there ongoing, how to communicate with people there. There's a lot of work around astronaut well-being, being away from the Earth for an extended period of time. So that it's much more complex process than the previous in the Apollo program.
And the previous one was pretty darn complicated anyway.
It was anyway.
Yeah, just getting there and getting back. But now what we're talking about is really designing a much more robust system to be able to have people stay there. What are the opportunities for Australia in this Artemis project?
The opportunities from Australia that we found at the Space Agency, I think they are multiple. We have been mapping capabilities that Australian companies and research centers and universities have at the moment that could support Artemis through different stages. There is this communications component, how to do that, operations, once you have there, you have this, like how you operate remotely, how to create the habitations, science and exploration. I think there's a talk later on, if I'm not mistaken, from, they're going to talk about how to produce food Plants in Space is one of the
Yes, we'll talk about that in the next
a new
session.
center of excellence that from ARC about food production. You need to think that you need to produce food indoors with not much water and not much soil. That's actually something that can be something brought back to the earth in terms of food production. So there's lots of opportunities that we are mapping.
But with the rover for a moment, and by the way, I just want to say to everybody, I'm looking here at Slido, and I'm going to pick it up in a moment because it's going crazy with all these questions. So a lot of you have questions. So I'll take a couple more minutes, then I'll start asking your questions as well. But with this rover, please tell me if I've got this right. My understanding is that this rover is going to help get to the South Pole. Is that right? We were going to try to get to the South Pole of the moon and check the water, if indeed we believe that there is water on the moon. And my understanding is that we can then use that water for not only life, but also in other complicated ways, potentially breaking it down for fuel. Can you talk a little bit about, again, the very exciting design elements of this project?
Yeah, so the project is called Trailblazer Rover. Currently we are on stage 2. This year we announced the 2 consortia that have won the stage 2. Stage 2 is going to be the design of the rover. There's 2 consortia that they are from with Australian industry, small and medium enterprises. There's some contributions also from resources and from universities. So each of those consortia during the next 18 months are going to put together their design proposal. And then one of those 2 will be granted what it's called the stage 2, which is going to be the actual build, launch, and operations of this rover. As you mentioned, the goal of this rover is going to be collecting moon soil called regolith. The Australian rover will collect the regolith, and it will give it to another instrument that is going to be there from NASA. And NASA will be doing the analysis to see whether they can extract water. Because one of the things we will need, if we want a sustained presence of humans in space, we'll have to be able to produce or to find resources for water.
What fascinates me as well about this project is how international it is. What, in your view, is the significance of this truly international cooperation that's starting to happen on the moon?
I think, as I said, and it's something that you can see as we go to our bilateral meetings or when I'm part of this International Space Exploration Coordination Group, it's like everyone acknowledges that space exploration can happen by yourself. You know, it requires an international effort. And I think it's a great way for international cooperation and the peaceful and sustainable uses of space. So it's given lots of opportunities, and everyone's drive is always the inspirational creation of new knowledge, new science. Things have changed a lot in these 50 years since the Apollo program. Technology is different, it has improved. So it's like going a step further to answer some of the most pressing questions as well from science.
Given how important the Trailblazer program is for Australia and how involved Australia is in that, maybe we can have a look at that slide again. And maybe you can walk us through the design elements of some of what the Trailblazer mission is attempting to accomplish. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? Because this is quite a significant project, this Trailblazer project.
It is. I don't know if we can have. You have to remember that it is our artist view. You see here that the rover is scooping the soil. That is not how it will be, likely. And at the moment, it's being, as I said, in this phase 1 is when it's going to be designed. So each of the consortia is going to be proposing how, based on the requirements, the rover will be collecting the soil and then delivering it to the other instrument that NASA will have. That will be the one that will be doing the soil and the regolith analysis. As you can see, this is the rover that will be, it's called CLIPS. So I think I didn't mention this, but Australia will be building, designing, and operating the rover. It's going to be NASA launching it for Australia as part of our international cooperation. And they will be selecting one of the CLIPS providers, which are commercial companies that do the moon landing and the delivery of the rover. So it's like a truly international effort.
I don't even know if this is possible, but can you roll that clip one more time? Just because it's pretty cool. And as you roll it again the second time, because, for our online audience and for me too, as you roll that the second time and we see that little rover come out, it's pretty fun to see Australian Space Agency on the moon, for starters.
It is.
It is. It's very exciting.
I'm not entirely sure the design will have the logo, but we'll make sure it is.
It's got maybe the thongs, just some little very Aussie, I don't know. At any rate, when it does that, it's hard to get a sense of scale. Can you tell us how large that rover is? It's hard to know.
It's going to be 30 kilos. That is the weight we have. So as part of the requirements, it has to be less than 30 kilos.
That's pretty small.
Yeah, it's going to be small.
And how much soil can it collect? How much can it do, a
That
small river like that?
I don't know. We don't have the details because that will be part of this phase 1, and depending also on our colleagues from NASA, how much they would need in the sample to be able to do the analysis.
Okay, I'm going to be delinquent if I don't ask you these Slido questions. So I'm going to pull these over so that we can have some of the questions others are asking you. Hold on one sec. Glasses necessary. We're going to bring those out. Another piece of great design technology, glasses.
Great technology. That was actually not one of the spin-outs from space, but your sunglasses are probably. The non-scratchy lens comes out of design to improve the astronaut helmets, actually, so that they wouldn't be scratched during space travel. So
I thought
when you use your sunnies,
no
you're actually using something that was developed for space.
I did not know that element of space technology. Sandra, thank you very much. That's great to know. All right. What Australian design innovations in the space industry are most internationally significant?
Design innovations.
Yes.
So until now, Australia hasn't had much space heritage in terms of assets in space, but they have contributed instruments to several missions, and they have I find that Australia space research and sciences have been involved in projects for many times. So I would say probably more on the instrument, payload, sensors side of things. Through this Moon to Mars initiative that the Space Agency started once we signed the Artemis Accords, we have also some schemes that target more supply chains, so for Australian companies to be able to enter supply chains from space agencies. So we have had some projects related to PNT. We have some people that we have supported that are doing design for spacesuits, fabric, textile for spacesuits. So there's a different range of contributions, although we do not have like a flagship asset in space. There's been small contributions for Australians. And in the recent months, there's been some companies that have been launching small satellites. So that's what we are also from the Space Agency trying to grow a bit, like the space heritage. A lot of being in the space business, they usually want to know what's your space heritage. Have you proven this in space beyond doing the tests on Earth? So that's part of what we are trying to grow in the Space Agency.
And my understanding as well, just getting back briefly to the robotics that will be used for the rover, my understanding is that the robotics from Australia really are world leading in terms of the innovative technologies from the mining sector and elsewhere out in the Pilbara and other places. Is that correct?
It is correct. It's and everywhere when we go, it's one of the highlights, and everyone is very interested in doing it in robotics and automation. I don't know if you've heard, recently they have reviewed the strategies for robotics in Australia, so it's recognized as well now a bit more nationally that it's one of the strengths.
Let me ask you another question. This is from one of our other viewers. With SpaceX going into space and other commercial investments, what ensures that outcomes of space research remain in the public good?
That's a very good question for which I do not have probably the answer. From a space agency perspective, I think that space agencies will in the future, just because it's a great effort, rely more and more on commercial players. As far as they are projects for space agencies, that will remain in the public good. Whilst they are private I guess, projects that it's something I wouldn't be able to
My
answer.
understanding as well is that there is one of the areas upon which Australia is being called upon is in establishing, if you will, I'll call it the rules of the road, although it's the wrong nomenclature for space, but the rules of the skies, the rules of space, because not to pick on any individual or company, but the reality is we're figuring out the laws, aren't we? I mean, that's part of the Artemis Accords, but isn't that another area that needs to be designed? What are the rules in space?
So there's a discipline called space law, and then there is the United Nations COPUOS. I don't know if you've heard about that one. The Australian Space Agency attends the COPUOS, so it's part of our remit that Australia complies with international obligations. But there's lots of things that are being developed pretty much as we speak, because when this was created, obviously there was not such a big group of commercial players that were into the space. Something that is being developed, for instance, is operations on the moon. There's going to be some missions that are going to be commercial missions.
Commercial missions.
How do you make sure that, two rovers don't crash against each other? What happens if you crash with someone? What is the liability? Who's responsible?
So there are rules in space that still need to be developed.
They are not. They are being developed. But there's a growing trend of fraud, and that's part of what I was saying. There's going to be new jobs appearing. Some of them are going to be technical, some scientific. Some of them will be related to these kind of things. Space ethics, the fact that you could do something doesn't mean that you should do it. There's also this discipline that's growing, space archaeology. So as all these things are now growing, one of them is this space law.
And I guess you could also say that things are moving at a speed where some of the legal frameworks and the like are catching up with what is possible.
Correct.
Let's have a look at some of our other questions, because we're getting great questions here. Children are super excited about the Australian Space Agency. I think that's true. What sorts of roles would they be looking at working at in the next 5 to 10 years?
At the agency?
If they're 5 now, or they're kids now, how about in the next 5 to 10 years? Or maybe they're 20 now. Maybe they're a little bit older than kids, but what are the jobs that are going to be available in the next 5 to 10 years?
In general, in Australia, I mean, for space?
Just in space, I think, full stop.
Yeah. As I said, there's jobs probably that do not exist yet, but there's also a range of careers that you can be working at space. Like, I think that sometimes people think of space and there's astronauts. You do not have to be an astronaut. You can be an astronaut. And now there's a possibility that in the future you could be Australian flying in space. I don't know if you've heard. One of my colleagues is currently training in the European Space Agency.
Let's go straight to that question.
Well, shall I finish with the...
Yes, please. Please.
But there's different careers. You can be, as I say, my background is engineering. You can do something more STEM-related, science. You can also be what we call space tradie, all the manufacturing and building, the space lawyers. There's space ethicists. So there's multiple careers. I think that people sometimes is I don't want to be a scientist, or I'm not a hands-on person. I think that space opens a range of opportunities. And now I think that one of the great things that I hope that people are getting as a message of the Australian Space Agency is that you can work in space and remain in Australia, which I think in the past people felt that they had to go overseas for that.
Sandra, though, going back to you yourself, you mentioned all these different things that you can do and still be in space research. What about you when you were young? Did you know that you wanted to work in space, or was that something that developed from your work in engineering?
I did want to work in space. Since I was very little, I did telecommunication engineering because I couldn't do aerospace because it was not in my hometown. And it was kind of the closest thing. So I started more on SATCOM, satellite communications. I don't know, I was really fascinated, and that's what brought me to doing engineering. But I do have other friends that were doing totally different careers, and they kind of just ended up doing space or working with space. Space application is something that a lot of people are doing. For instance, data analytics. I've got lots of people that were doing, they are software developers working on processing satellite data. I think that if you want to work in space, no matter what your background is, I think you can find your space.
You can find your space in space. I like that. Going back to what we were chatting about in terms of astronauts, since of course they are usually the face of the space program, with Catherine heading to Europe for astronaut training, this may be somebody who knows Catherine, what is the Australian Space Agency's goal for Australian astronaut involvement in Artemis and beyond?
At the moment, we are looking into what human spaceflight could look in Australia. We have started with looking at the regulation because that's something that is not regulated in Australia. So Australia has been doing launches of assets, but not human launches. So we are looking into that. Currently, the opportunity that was given to Catherine was to do this training with the European Space Agency, which is great to get insights into what that evolves. And I think that's going to help us, I guess, bringing back the knowledge as to how this could look like for Australia. But I think it's exciting because she's the first person that is being trained with the Australian flag. Australia has had some astronauts in the past that have flown on space missions, but they have done it as dual citizens with another country's flag.
And when you're talking about the Australian flag, and we look at beyond the mission to moon and we start looking moon to Mars, what is the role of Australia in moon to Mars and the potential, which is being discussed, of colonization or human beings on Mars in the 2030s? Is that realistic in your view? And what role does Australia play?
I think we are talking more towards the 2040s. I think it depends a lot on how the timeframes go for the moon settlements and the technology development that it's that, like a return trip to Mars is kind of like 2 years, and once you're going there, there's no way you're coming back. There's been lots of, there's rovers on Mars, which are mostly looking into what's the environment, is there water, what's their life, would it be possible for humans to live there? I think that we will get there. There's going to be people going to Mars, probably, and I think I heard someone saying that the person that will go to Mars is currently in primary school. So if someone is hearing me,
I think
they've
that might have
got
been
people
Pam
in primary
Milroy.
school.
You think so?
Yep, that person is already, is already in primary school. So I think that we are looking at that time frame.
Let's talk about colonists, people living on the moon. Let me ask you to paint me a picture. 20 years from now, what does the moon look like?
In terms of habitation.
Are there people? How many people are there? Are there mining operations? Are human beings living there full time? If so, how many? Is it indeed becoming a gateway to Mars? Can you picture for us, in your mind, what do you imagine in 20 years is happening on the moon?
I do not think it's going to be like a big population on the moon. However, I would expect, my feeling is that there's going to be people living there. Before, I don't know if you've seen it, there was like a spaceship there, that's a gateway. The gateway is going to be, it's like the space station currently, like for people to be there, conduct experiments. But it's not going to be like the space station in terms of like permanently living there. It's going to be like for astronauts to spend a bit of time there with the Orion capsule and then do like trips to and from the moon. I would expect there's going to be people living there. And I think that by then we will already be talking about what's possible in terms of someone living in Mars.
Do you yourself want to live on Mars?
No. I'm one of those that I do not want to be an astronaut. I get motion sickness, so I wouldn't be a great astronaut myself, so I don't think I would pass the test, the medicals.
So you're very happy to be in space, on the ground.
I'm on the ground supporting space activities and exploration, yeah. But I think that's the great thing about space, and that's why it's something that blocks people. I've seen lots of people that say, yeah, but I don't want to be an astronaut. It's like, I don't want to be an astronaut either, and I love working in space activities, like just facilitating this. I was a researcher myself doing space research and before, just it's very fulfilling.
All right, I'm going to look at a couple more of these questions just to make sure we're not missing any. What role should museums play within the space and design ecosystem?
I think museums are a very important piece of the puzzle, not only for the inspire, but also for the outreach. I don't know, these places in museums, being able to have hands-on activities every time. I think it's a very engaging, very easy to understand concepts that I think they're very easy to kind of like, they sink in that information. So sometimes, for example, you see me, someone from my colleagues talking, can be very high level, but I think that it's kind of like that proximity learning that is present. You can go and go again and learn again. I think it's very important, and I'm very happy, and I would like to thank Museums Victoria and ScienceWorks for having our display here and for letting us do this, because I think it's a very important part of the work we do and what we try to achieve.
I agree with you. A big shout out to the museum for hosting us and for having this conversation. As someone who is so close to it, who spends every day working in space, what excites you most about what's coming in the sector?
From my perspective, it's the development of new knowledge, what can be achieved, what could be responsible, sustainable use of space. I think it's always the what's next, I think space provides a very hard environment, lots of challenges, but challenge you to make the most out of you, get scientists and engineers together, people from many different backgrounds. It provides, I think, this environment, this challenging question that also supports a lot, like teamwork, people from diverse backgrounds working together towards the same goal, it's like having this, maybe like as a trailblazer, like this flagship, this challenge that we address together.
And when you think about that and you look at what's coming, there's also a question of competition in space as well. So one of the other questions that we have is, are we facing competition in getting to the South Pole and or the moon? And how does the advanced design of other countries affect this?
Yes, to the first question, we are going through competition. I think it's another space race in a way, like everyone wants to be the first one getting to the South Pole. South Pole is a region of the moon that hasn't been visited before. It has been monitored with Proxy, with robotic exploration. But yes, there is clear competition as to who's the first one there, who's the first one that could be settling, they're establishing a constant presence there. And I think that it's like whoever can be the one designing the technology that allows for that first. And I think that's also good in terms of like, it's a competition towards achieving the objective.
And do you have if this were the Melbourne Cup and you were putting your money on one of the countries or one of the consortia of countries to get there first, who are you backing?
I don't know, there's lots of close competitors, so it's going to be a tight one. There was an attempt actually by a commercial player that attempted landing on the South Pole that unfortunately failed a couple of weeks ago, I think it was, when they crashed a few meters from the moon. That was, for instance, a commercial endeavor with a Japanese company launching that. So
the race is on.
The race is on, yep.
All right, let's ask a couple more questions here that we have. We have about 5 more minutes. Will the regolith analysis happen on the moon in real time?
It will happen on the moon, yes.
And how long will that take?
That I don't know. That is the instrument that NASA is leading. But in this case, they are not, like, If you've seen sometimes, I don't know if you've ever seen the rovers on Mars that is currently taking samples and dropping them there, waiting for another one to go and pick them up and bring them here. In this case, the analysis is going to be done on site. Yeah.
And what are you expecting, if anything, to find when they analyze the regolith? Do you have any suppositions about what
I don't have an indication about that, and I don't know.
You're a scientist. You're scientific, aren't you? You're going to wait until you get the data.
I need to until data. However, there's been experiments here on the ground. NASA team has already been successful extracting oxygen from a sample that they had. So it's not going to be attempted for the first time on the moon. There's been analysis done on the Earth already to us. It's not like they go and see how they go.
Okay, all right, a couple more questions. Lucas, are there plans on how long-term low-gravity effects on moon colonists will be addressed? Has there been thought given to high-speed centrifugal habitation?
In terms of the first one, yes and no. So there's been long-term analysis done on astronauts in the International Space Station. We, of course, do not have these effects, but that's going to be part of it. People that are going to go there are going to be monitored because it's going to be part of the process into learning how much. It's a bit as I was saying before. At the moment, there's been some levels of communication back to Earth that people in the ISS were doing, but we have to rethink all that completely with people that are going to be for long periods of time in terms of human well-being, of being so far away for such a period of time. So that's part of it.
All right. I think there's just a couple more questions that we'll ask.
There's plenty of them. Will I be having those? I will be happy to have the questions offline if you can send them to me to have a look.
That's wonderful. That's great that you'll take further questions as well, but I'll just give us a couple more here. This is similar to one you've answered before, but I think it's worth asking you again. Is the Australian Space Agency going to get involved in other aspects of Artemis, like the Lunar Gateway, Mars exploration, habitation, etc.? Can you just play out a little bit more the role of Australia as this project goes forward?
So at the moment, the only project that we have already an ongoing cooperation is this one. However, as I said before, we are mapping the different capabilities in Australia, and every time we go to bilaterals, we do showcase them. So we are hoping that we can get other involvement in other different aspects. That's part of also of my role by joining this kind of international groups, is seeing where, knowing our capabilities, we could have subsequent projects to work with.
All right, and I think we've got time for two. How large is the Australian Space Agency? What is the plan for future growth? And you might want to answer at the same time. I love this question. Will the Australian Space Agency run a poll to allow the public to name the rover? I think that's a great question.
That's a very good one, which I cannot answer. I will pass on to our communications team.
I think we need to be able to name the rover. Does anybody in the audience have any suggestions? Shout them out. What should we call the rover?
Maybe just write them down and give them to me, and I'll see what we can do.
I think absolutely. You've got your opportunity to get it directly to the Australian Space Agency. If you have suggestions,
we'll just do names, a draw.
Yes, let's name the rover. And how big is the Australian Space Agency, and is there plan for growth?
In terms of staff, we are just, I think, under 100, probably. Yeah. This to say we are not statutory. We are a division of the Department of Industry, Science and Resources. And we must be, I don't know the head count, but just under 100 probably.
Okay, just under 100. Okay, or that's 100. The number.
That's more or less.
Right, more or less. Okay,
hopefully I didn't miss anyone. Apologies.
And I'm sure they're all terrific, just like you. All right, two more. What are career prospects like for electronics and or software engineers in space? So electronics and software engineers, I would think those would be some pretty good prospects in space.
Yeah. That's one of the, I think, most sought for skills.
Okay, and last question, we'll stop on this because it's about the South Pole, and that seems like a good place to stop. Returning to that one more time. Why hasn't the South Pole been explored before? Is it just, it was hard to get to on the moon, and that's the reason? Or maybe you can play that out for us a little bit.
It was hard to get to, and then it gets less sun. So in terms of having someone there, you kind of like would be exposed to a wide range of temperatures. Your body, you may be in the shade, half of your body, and in the sun, half of the body. So the systems to have a human there with such a gradient of temperatures in your spacesuit was not feasible. And also there were not landing locations that had been identified because of the profile. So other areas were easier to land in for a starting point.
And let's go back to those temperature extremes, because they are extreme. What are the highs and lows roughly when we're dealing with Moon?
I don't have the numbers.
I think
for
it's like
that
105.
One,
It's something crazy.
Yeah, that's something that is kind of like one of the most critical designs for the new spacesuits. Is like, how are you going to balance the different temperature gradients within the spacesuit? As there's the day, kind of like day-night.
So that's going to be one of the challenges. Oh, I have one more question that I want to ask. Given that I've now learned that my sunglasses are NASA technology and possibly Australian Space Agency technology, what can I expect in the next 5 to 10 years? What cool gadget or positive change in my life can I expect from the Artemis mission and the space exploration that we're now doing? A serious question, though. What kinds of expectations do you have about good things that we'll have back on Earth because of our exploration of space?
I think there's going to be a lot about, as I said, textiles, like how to do, there's actually now some hiking gear that already has, like thin clothes with maintain a lot of heat. I guess it's going to be a lot about powers and batteries. You need to think if there's a sustained presence of humans on that, you need to produce power. You need to store that power. So I think there's going to be a lot of involvement there. There's going to be an involving communication rates, improvement in robotics and automation. I think it's going to be further improvements to lots of technologies and happen.
Well, I think it's been fascinating to have this opportunity to think about design when it comes to space, to hear more about the rover and the Artemis project that we've got, Moon to Mars mission as well. Ladies and gentlemen, both those of you online and those of you here in the room, firstly, I want to have a big round of applause for Dr. Alessandra Monerris Belda. Thank you. That was a nice warm round of applause. And I just want to tell you a couple of other things that we're going to be expecting. There's another session that's going to be happening here shortly. We're going to talk about sustainability, everything from plants on space, which is fascinating too. We've got a couple of fantastic speakers who are going to be joining us. Again, we're going to have, about the hashtag Rovers 2005. If we've missed any of your questions, make sure that you send them through to us. And let me see if there's any other notes. Alice, anything else we should mention to our crew before they go? Can they stay and mingle for a few minutes when they finish? It sounds like you can have a drink as well. I'm getting the universal drink sign. So it sounds like when you finish here, you should stop, have a drink outside, maybe get a chance to meet Sandra. And Jonathan, I'm going to throw over to you to wrap us up.
Thank you. Can I have a huge round of applause for Sara as well for being our moderator tonight? Yes, as Sara mentioned, the night does continue. If you have tickets to our planetarium show, we'll be opening doors for a session at 6:30. So feel free to grab a drink at the bar and wait to enjoy that one. There are still tickets available. So if you would like to stay and see our planetarium show, please see Gerard and he'll be able to sell you a ticket. And then the second session that we'll be having tonight as part of Design Week begins at 7:30. So if you're not joining us for the planetarium, you can duck over to Graceland, get a quick dinner and be back for the second session as well. But once again, a huge thank you to both Sara and Sandra for joining us tonight. Thank you very much.
More than 150 years after it first gazed upon the stars, we are restoring the Great Melbourne Telescope, an extraordinary icon of Australia's scientific and engineering heritage. We are seeking your support for the last stage of the restoration, which will see the dynamic activation of the telescope. Once complete, the majestic Great Melbourne Telescope will be equipped to once again explore the wonders of the southern skies. Donate today and make an impact.